What's up, everybody? Matt Gajewski here, back again with the Awesemo team. And today we're talking some college football DFS. We have a big Friday night slate on November the 19th. It is 5 games up, 5 games down. We'll get into that and much more. But before we get started, hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you know when this and all other content goes live. Bringing you behind the glass, here is our player usage tool, looking at all these player data for these college football teams. And we are going to kick things off with Southern Miss taking on Louisiana Tech. Again, it is a massive slate, 5 games for Friday, which is fairly large. Louisiana Tech in this spot is a 15.5-point favorite. The total here is 49 points. On the Southern Miss side, it's tough to take a look at this offense at this point. They're not passing the ball whatsoever. You see a 46% pass rate on the year. They abandoned the quarterback in their most recent game. They didn't list one on the depth chart ahead of this game. And Jake Lang, he only had 2 snaps. He was the only quarterback to receive a snap in the game. They went full-on Wildcat with Frank Gore, and down at receiver, you can see they used quite a bit of Antavius Willis. So that there's a Wildcat team now. Basically, it means all the receivers are out of play. Like Jason Brownlee, their wide receiver 1, had 5 of their team's 7 targets last week. DeMarcus Jones missed the game, so Jacarius Caston and Brad Dennis, they ended up playing a full-time role, but each only had a target. They're just not going to throw the ball, making all these guys basically way too expensive. Even Brownlee's just not in play if they're doing triple option. Frank Gore, running back, I mean, he has no pass catching upside anymore, and he needs to be treated as such. Like, he's basically a triple option running back at this point. He's averaging 71 yards per game, which is a bit expensive. They split time with him and Antavius Willis 50-50. Willis is a min-price receiver with this team as 2 touchdown underdogs. On the other side, Austin Kendall was benched. Louisiana Tech is typically, a little bit up-tempo and fairly pass-heavy. J.D. Head replaced him, and he is going to benefit from their team total. It's over 30 points, but he's not mobile. He's entirely reliant on his passing volume, which is usable in this spot. Again, it's a really good matchup. Southern Miss hasn't been able to defend anybody. The best spot to get to for this team is probably Marcus Williams, their running back, who they recently committed to even more than they had. It is a bit of a timeshare with Greg Gardner and Keon Henry Brooks, the Vanderbilt transfer, but Marcus Williams is handling most of the work. 29 carries in their last game. He's active in the pass game with 24 targets on the year. He's one of the better plays on this slate, with Southern Miss allowing nearly 170 rushing yards per game. Gardner and Henry Brooks would be GPP plays. In the receiving room, 2 guys getting all the snaps, Smoke Harris and Trey Harris. Smoke has more receiving yards on the year. He has more targets. Over the last 4 games, 9.3 targets for Smoke to 5 flat for Trey Harris. Smoke is the better play overall, but Trey Harris is significantly cheaper. So at 3,500, he's the preferred play. They're rotating their wide receiver 3 and 4. They use 4 wide a lot, but it's a rotation between Jared Memes. He goes by Bub Memes on the platforms, DraftKings and FanDuel. He rotates with Griffin Herbert and Isaiah Graham, none of whom are averaging more than 4 targets per game. So with Trey Harris being so cheap, he's easily the preferred option down here. Samuel Emilus, the UMass transfer, is not active at all anymore. Game 2, we have Houston taking on Memphis. This game is a much better total at 59.5. Houston still a 8.5-point favorite, but a lot more back and forth affair here. Memphis is up-tempo, pass-heavy. Houston is much the same, but just a little closer to average, but still above average in terms of pass rate and play volume. On Memphis, Seth Hennigan, he's somewhat mobile, 102 rushing yards, but he gets it done as a passer. He's just expensive on this slate comparatively. Like Clayton Tune on the other side is much cheaper. But overall, Memphis is going into a hard matchup against a good Houston defense. Hennigan being somewhat mobile, averaging 34 attempts per game, over 300 yards as a passer. He's live for stacks. One of the problems is Calvin Austin's hurt. He hasn't been practicing, but he has been playing through the injury. Not well, I might add. Like, he's out there for around 50% of the snaps right now, and that was reflected in his 3-target game. Again, Austin's going to be super risky, but a good risk-reward play if he's healthy. We just don't know the status of his health right now. It doesn't appear that he's fully healthy, and I wouldn't be surprised if he misses the game. With Calvin Austin down, we saw an increase in volume for Javon Ivory, tight end Sean Dykes, and Eddie Lewis. All 3 are very cheap. Lewis being the cheapest, I think he's certainly live. He's averaging the most targets among those 3 in the last 4 games, but Sean Dykes has the most consistent role on the year. He's also the second leading receiver on the team. So I'm inclined to get to all 3 of these guys. I prefer Dykes or just going down to Lewis. Javon Ivory's certainly live as well. He has a 10-target game mix in the last 4. The backfield's a mess. Brandon Thomas has been banged up, so he's received a reduced workload, splitting time with Rodriguez, Clark, and Asa Martin. I don't see that changing a ton here. Thomas is the leading rusher on the team, 668 yards. He is averaging the most opportunities per game at 14. But again, it's a health thing. We just don't know. And with the timeshare, there's better plays on the slate. You could certainly play Thomas in GPPs. On the other side, Clayton Tune benefits, again, from being fairly up-tempo, fairly pass-heavy. He's not shown a lot of mobility this year. He suffered a hamstring injury against Rice and hasn't really shown a lot of dual threat ability since then. But in the past, he's been very mobile. So that's something that's always alive for him. And then he's averaging 245 pass yards per game on 29.5 attempts. Again, he's been banged up, so these numbers are somewhat depressed. But Tune being much cheaper than Hennigan on the other side, he's a better price-adjusted play overall behind their 34-point implied team total. In the backfield, it is Alton McCaskill as the 1A. Texas Tech transfer. Tizon Henry is the 1B. It is a 70-30 split, 65-35 split, somewhere in there, with McCaskill being far, far more efficient. So if you're playing one of these backs, it's McCaskill for me. Henry live in tournaments. Memphis allows over 150 rush yards per game, so decent matchup there. In the receiving room, Nathaniel Dell, he's a pretty good option on this slate. 9.5 targets per game over their last 4. With Calvin Austin not really in play because of the injury, Dell becomes a lot more attractive on this slate. Still not the best efficiency numbers, 86 yards per game, but you could certainly play Dell. Outside of him, it's tough to get to any of these guys. Keyshawn Carter missed their last game, and his injury status has not been updated. He's been functioning as the wide receiver, too, so he is a name to monitor. Without Keyshawn Carter, Jeremy Singleton would be far more attractive. Still just 3.3 targets per game for Singleton. You'll see Jake Herslow. You'll see Jalen Irwin mix in. It's not the best situation behind Dell. The only other consistent option is Kristen Trey in the tight end. At 3,900, he would be my preference, but ultimately these guys are all dart throws behind Dell. Arizona taking on Washington State, 15-point spread in favor of Washington State, 52.5 total. Not as nice as I thought it would be. Arizona's had plenty of problems scoring. Will Plummer is somewhat mobile, 171 yards on the ground, but just completely inept as a passer, despite pretty heavy volume here. You're hoping that maybe he just backdoors his way into some production at 5,500. But I would rather play like JD Head with a much better implied team total. Arizona ultimately is still implied below 20 points, which doesn't give the entire team a lot of intrigue. Plus, Arizona's best matchup comes on the ground, where Washington State allows 185 yards per game, but that's even difficult to take advantage of. Michael Wiley, Drake Anderson, Jalen John, and Stevie Rocker are all splitting time. Rocker leads the backfield in recent weeks, but just 14 carries over the last 2. Nobody in this backfield is averaging more than 31.5 rushing yards per game. With the rotation, very difficult to get to Arizona. In the receiving game, Stanley Berryhill actually projects somewhat well. He's averaging 9.5 targets per game. Obviously, the inefficiency is clear, just 60 yards receiving on that volume, but the volume is there nonetheless. He's a very cheap alpha receiver in an inept offense, but he's the one I would get to. Behind him, they've changed their rotation a lot. It's Dorian Singer out on the field for nearly all the snaps, 8 targets in back-to-back games. He's 3,800. And then they're using a ton of Anthony Simpson, way down at 3K flat, 5 targets over the last games, but he's the wide receiver 3. Brian Castile, Tavian Cunningham, Boobie Curry, Jamari Joyner, none of them played more than 20 snaps in the most recent game. It was Berryhill, Singer, and Simpson. Tough situation to trust. On the other side, Washington State, great implied team total north of 33 points. Arizona hasn't been able to stop anybody. Jaden Delores, somewhat mobile, 70 yards on the ground, benefits from a very pass-heavy scheme, throwing the ball 56% of the time, just a little bit slower overall. But Delores is another solid price-adjusted play, averaging nearly 250 yards per game through the air on 32 attempts. In the run game, Max Borghi and Deion McIntosh are in a 50-50 timeshare. You have Borghi averaging 14 touches per game, McIntosh 11. This is a good matchup against a poor Arizona run defense, but deciphering between the two is difficult. I think both are great GPP plays. If you're stacking Delora, very easy to do so. 4 wide receivers are on the field every single play, and they do not rotate. Travell Harris and Calvin Jackson are the top 2. They're averaging 8.5 and 8.2 targets per game. Jackson used a little more downfield. Harris has more targets, a little more underneath, but both very secure options. Prefer Jackson slightly. And from there, Dazon Stribling and Donovan Ali are the wide receiver 3 and 4. Stribling more targeted than Ali, but these guys are just your cheaper access points to Washington State. Again, they're on the field almost every single play, so these guys are solid dart throws. Air Force taking on Nevada, 52.5-point total. Air Force spread moving in their favor pretty significantly. They were 1-point underdogs. Now they're 1-point favorites. They run the triple option, but they're very fast. 73.5 plays per game. They actually pass a little bit more than some triple option teams. Like Hazik Daniels averages 91 yards per game through the air on 9 attempts, which is pretty solid for him. But this triple option is different than like Navy's. They flow through their fullback. So Hazik Daniels does have solid rushing output, 639 yards, but he's far behind Brad Roberts, who has over 1,000, and he's actually averaging 106.5 rushing yards per game. With that said, Brad Roberts has no involvement in the pass game, so everything he does has to come on the ground. And Nevada plays middling run defense overall, so it's not the best matchup. But behind Roberts, Omar Fatah has been the primary backup, but recently they started using a couple other guys like Dane Kinnaman. He's not in the DraftKings player pool, but he's on FanDuel. He had 8 carries last week. He's also been targeted a decent amount, 10 targets over the last 2 games. Brandon Lewis plays like one of the slot back positions, slot back like slash receiver. He's averaging 3.8 targets per game over the last 4, and he has been involved as a rusher, 4 carries in the last game. Probably still not in play at 3,900, but he's a name worth mentioning. They also run DeAndre Hughes, Emmanuel Mitchell. Behind Brad Roberts, it's a very difficult situation to trust. If I'm playing anybody, it would probably be Brandon Lewis, but that's even risky there. On Nevada, Carson Strong obviously benefits from a top 3 passer in the country, extremely fast, 76 plays per game. Air Force has played phenomenal defense, and they'll depress your pace somewhat. But again, they've been playing fast themselves, so I'm not even sure the play volume is a worry here for Strong. What is a worry is his negative rushing yards, negative 146 on the year, but he's been able to overcome that through pure passing volume, 46 attempts per game, 355 yards through the air, and Strong has the stacking options to get it done. He's done it so consistently that he is still in play, even at 9K. Romeo Dubes is the wide receiver 1, 11 targets per game over the last 4. Cole Turner is expected to return from a concussion. He missed their last game, but he had no fewer than 8 targets in their 3 prior. He's the second leading receiver on the team. Then you have Melquan Stovall acting as the true wide receiver 2. Torrey Horton and Justin Lockhart, they're 2 guys that are on the field a fair amount as well. Horton slightly more than Lockhart, but on the year, they average 4.9, 4.7 targets per game, respectively. Recently, Horton has taken on a much larger role. In the last 4 games, his target volume has spiked to 7.5 per game, whereas Lockhart has remained fairly consistent at 4.8. So that's reflected in price. If you're getting down to the Lockhart range, I would rather play Stovall. But if you absolutely can't find the salary for Stovall, I'm fine with Lockhart. But ranking them, it's Dubes 1, Turner 2, Horton 3, Stovall 4, Lockhart 5. All of them are viable. In the run game, Toa Tau and Devontae Lee split time. It's not the highest running attack, or I should say highest volume running attack. So neither are particularly strong plays. Tough matchup against a good Air Force defense too. Basically, Toa, he averages 14.5 touches per game to Lee's 9.5. Is that enough to get it done against a strong Air Force defense? I think Nevada gets it done more with the pass. Last game, San Diego State, UNLV, the worst game for DFS purposes on the slate. You have San Diego State as a 10.5-point favorite with a 41 total. Both teams are extremely slow. San Diego State, extremely run heavy. UNLV is balanced. For San Diego State, Lucas Johnson's taken over for Jordan Brookshire. There's good matchups across the board here, but it's such a low volume pass attack, and Johnson's active in the run game with 192 yards, but not active enough to really give him a ceiling that he's a difficult option to trust. I would rather play Will Plummer. I would rather play JD Head, but tournaments, I could see it just really risky. Greg Bell has recently split more time with Chance Bell and Keegan Williams. I think a lot of that's a matter of game script, but even in their last contest, it was against Nevada and it was a close game. So seeing Chance Bell and Keegan Williams play so much is concerning for Greg Bell. With that said, still a decent matchup against UNLV on the other side. So I'm willing to roll the dice. Chance, if you think the workload stays split between both Bells, Chance would be a supreme value at 3,600. In the receiving game for San Diego State, Jesse Matthews, Tyrell Shavers, Elijah Coffey, those are the top 3 options. Matthews leads the team overall in targets among the 3, but Coffey has the most efficiency. Still, he only has 250 yards. Like, it's tough to trust any of these receivers. Shavers is the cheapest. He would be somebody to look to potentially. He has at least 6 targets in 2 of the last 3. But again, really low volume attack here. Very volatile. You have Daniel Bellinger is actually the leader in targets. They're tight end, but still he's 283 yards in the year. You're not getting a ton of efficiency with these pass catchers. On the other side, UNLV goes into a buzzsaw of a defense. It looks like Cameron Fryle's just taken over for Doug Brumfield at this point. Brumfield got hurt, but I guess watch the status and see who's warming up under center. It could change, but I'm not expecting it to. Would be shocked if Brumfield gets the start over Fryle at this point. Both are somewhat mobile. Both are middling efficiency-wise in terms of passing. It's a really tough matchup, so I find it difficult to get to either, depending on who starts. In the run game, Charles Williams is an absolute monster, even in negative game script. Like, this UNLV team has been poor this year, but Williams still averages over 100 yards on the ground per game. Somewhat active as a pass catcher, too. He's averaging 12 yards per game there. The volume is going to be there. It's just a matter of efficiency, and that does not project to be a very efficient game against the San Diego State defense, allowing barely over 90 yards to rushers. But with that said, Williams had 37 carries in their last game. Like, they will feed him the rock. In the receiving game, Kyle Williams is the wide receiver 1. Steve Jenkins is the wide receiver 2. Both have over 500 yards. Both have good target volume. Both average 8.5 targets per game in the last 4 contests. But this is a team that could change a little bit here. They've dealt with a lot of injuries. Like, Marcus Phillips is running as the wide receiver 2, but Zyle Griffin's been banged up at times. Mendiola Jensen's been banged up. Tyleek Collins, Shelton Zion. There's Jordan Jakes. Like, so many players have been banged up that if some of them return, like, does this devolve into a rotation? I think it very well could. So if I'm taking a stab on the offense, it's either Williams, Jenkins, or their tight end, Giovanni Faolo, who's missed time himself but returned last week. Even with his absence, he's still third on the team in targets of 23. So he's in play, but probably not given how much value there is. But that's the slate. Let me know in the comment section who you guys are liking. Otherwise, my name is Matt Gajewski on Twitter at Matt_Gajewski. Thank you guys for watching. We will see you again next time.